Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's time for the Brown Sports Bag. From the heart of the Barrens, a weekly local sports machine. Alongside John Butler, here's your host, James Brown.
Well, John, we're back again this week. We left off last week talking about the fact that there was going to be a KHSAA board meeting. That was last Thursday, and that meeting was going to address whether or not we were going to stay on schedule for what was approved in November as the start of the basketball season, basically.
Yeah, if people don't think sports is important, they ought to go and look at the number of people that watched and replied to the KHSAA meeting last week. Amazing. Yeah,
they do a Zoom call meeting, and that some people track the numbers. I don't know how many people were on there, but more than 100, maybe less than 5,000. I don't know how many people had tuned into it, but it was everybody was on the edge of their seat to see what the Board of Control was going to decide. And there were a couple of proposals that were on the table, and I think you and I should kind of break down our opinions on how this turned out here after I explain these proposals. One was to go ahead and start winter sports practice on December 14th, which is today. And that was approved. And then start the season January 4th, as they had approved in November, and that was approved. And to end the season with the state basketball state tournaments in late March, which was what was eventually approved.
They pushed the state tournament back 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
And the regular season back. Regular season gets extended 2 more weeks.
Right. So you get a couple of extra weeks out of that setup. And then but there was another proposal on the table, and that proposal was a little bit confusing. Now, unlike in some of the past board meetings that they've done digital online through Zoom, they've not posted these proposals for everybody to see the last couple of meetings, which makes kind of deciphering what they're talking about sometimes a little bit hazy. So there were two parts to that. One was they would push back the actual start of the season in terms of first games to January 18th or January 11th. That was kind of on the table and discussed. But the biggest part of what eventually was voted on was pushing back the state tournaments to be played at the end of April and early May. And that proposal was shot down 9-8, which was the closest vote we've seen in any of these proposals and any of these discussions. And the discussion about that whole thing was kind of fascinating in a way, because, it did come up about whether or not to, how much to interrupt spring sports, and that seemed to play a big part in not wanting to do it in late April. But then, there were some people who are just like traditionalists, so to speak. They want to have that state tournament in March, as close as they can have it there. And I don't know which part of that won out based on that vote, but that was kind of the back and forth discussion as it was. And John, when you saw that option on the table to play the state tournaments in late April, what did you think?
Well, I'm shocked that they kept the schedule the way it is, just because of all the talk. Every basketball coach that I talked to was convinced that they were going to move everything back again. Yeah. I mean, it was overwhelming. I didn't hear one positive comment that they were going to keep things the same. So when they voted that down, the extending of the state tournament to late April, early May, and pushing everything back 9-8, I was surprised myself, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
It came down to the commissioner thought it would be wise to push it back, the state tournament back, because last year we lost the state tournament, and it's not just you lose the state tournament, which is a great, this is what every high school basketball player wants to do, is play in a state tournament, play in Rupp Arena or wherever.
Yeah,
it's a financial. It's the one thing that basically the KHSAA makes all kinds of money on. That is not, it's not a greed deal, but they use that revenue that they generate to pay for so many other things.
Right.
And I think common sense would tell you that the chances of more people being allowed to come in late April is going to be much more enhanced than in March.
Yeah.
And so from a revenue perspective, but I think what lost, but the more I watched the discussion, it was more about spring sports.
Mm-hmm.
That remember that spring sports was canceled last year, and there was concern that there would be an overlap between basketball and some of the spring sports, which makes it tough on kids who play both.
Right.
I thought a solution could have been where you push both sports back. Spring sports could actually move into June some as well, where the weather's actually better. And to be honest with you, I was kind of leaning toward moving everything back again. I'm not against playing right now. I just personally, I just think there's going to be more interruptions early than if we push everything back with the vaccines coming. I just thought, if you start in late January and so forth, that perhaps the season would be less interrupted. That's where I'm coming from. So I'm glad they're playing. I knew they was going to play all along, and I'm tickled to death. My niece is going to play right now. They've been, it's been tough on her and tough on a lot of athletes. I think a lot of the players are very happy they get a chance to play. The question is now, since we're going to start practice today and they start on January 4th, how many games can they get in?
Yeah.
The schedules are full. They're lining up the schedules. It almost looks like baseball schedules.
Yeah.
They got 3-4 games.
Yeah.
There's a lot of games on the schedule. Just the question is, can they get through? How many can they get through with? And that's. And the answer to that is up to the individual school districts.
Yeah.
And that was made plain at the KHSAA meeting. There is no rule on whether or not you can play or not. It's going to be up to the school district on whether or not, if you're in the red, and every county in the state is in the red except for one.
Yeah.
The recommendation is not to play.
Yeah.
But we saw that in football. That's only a recommendation, and most schools in this area went ahead and played in the red. They weren't looking at it as your county's in the red. They were basically, the schools were basing it on your individual school. What's it like in your school?
Yeah.
And some school districts across the state are not going by that. They just say if the county's in the red, they're not playing. So I'm going to be interested to see if schools adjust that philosophy or what do they do.
Yeah, I will tell you this. I think about 7 a.m. or so on Thursday morning, I got a text that told me that they were not going to push the season back, that they had had some late-night discussions, I guess, amongst board members, and they had decided they were going to roll with what they had on the table already. They weren't sure whether or not they were going to push the state tournament back to April. And I'm with you on this, that when they were sitting there during the discussion, people were talking about a 6-week overlap between, if they had the state tournament in April, between basketball and spring sports. And I was like, 6 weeks? Yes, if you start, as you usually do, 3 weeks before your traditional start time, which used to be, basically the first week of April, which would be spring break. And then a few years ago, they rolled it back to like middle of March or early March. And to be honest with you, I've had baseball and softball coaches kind of complain to me about them rolling back that start because they're like, a lot of times we don't get these games in. They'll have 7 or 8 games scheduled in those weeks, and they don't get them played because of the weather.
I've seen that I think there's kind of a split on that issue in terms of, I think almost most baseball coaches would prefer the season go through June than start in March, just like you said.
Yeah.
Softball is a little bit different because softball has such a following in terms of the travel.
Yeah.
And there's so many huge travel AAU tournaments that kick up late May and June, and it seems like the college recruiters swarm to that.
Yeah.
So it seems like to me some of the softball coaches are not as they're fearful of losing players in June, and the baseball coaches aren't exactly have that same fear, and it's because of the dynamics of the travel, which seems to be greater in softball than baseball.
I'll tell you this too. I don't know how many states, but I do know Kentucky is one of the few states that their state tournaments are played after the end of the school year. I know that a lot of the states down south, they are done before by graduation day with their seasons a lot of times, or like right at that same window. And I do wonder if the influence of what you're talking about, the summer travel and that kind of thing, which is very prevalent in the South, does not have an impact on that. I don't know if that's something that maybe developed because of where
they also have better weather where they could start earlier too.
Right, and so that I'm sure those things play a factor. But that also brings me to this question: why do we always commit to making every sport the same? I mean, even if it's in the same season, softball and baseball does not have to play on the same schedule.
I agree with that. It's a good point.
I mean, why not get your baseball coaches together and your softball coaches together and say, which way would you rather do this? I mean, I don't know, that might alleviate some things on the KHSAA in terms of staffing state tournaments and that kind of stuff, I would think.
Yeah, I agree. They're not run to death.
No, right.
By hosting them at the same time. Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, we got a little off track on that. I'm with you, though. I felt like they should have gone ahead and pushed back the state tournament to late April because of a couple of different reasons. One is the revenue, as we discussed. I think the boys state tournament last year or the year before, 2019, was worth $1.3 million in terms of money that went into the KHSAA that then is used predominantly to help pay for the other state tournaments.
That's correct.
So that's a huge loss. You don't want to do that twice. I know a lot of that money's in sponsorships, but a lot of it is in attendance. And so they needed to preserve that, I think, as best as possible. And the other thing was, as we talked about, the stress on getting in games in that window I think the district tournaments will be played March.
It's been pushed back too,
or something like that.
It's been pushed back. Yep.
It'll be first week of March, I believe, is what they were set up to, and maybe the regions on the 15th. I think that's the way it works out, somewhere in that window. To get more games in, and knowing that you may wind up with fewer games on the front of that schedule if you wanted to start on January 4th, which I'm with you. I think they just go ahead and get started, get as many games in as possible, because we've seen there's going to be disruption to these schedules. And then have some leeway on the back end, that kind of thing. I think when we're off air, you'd mentioned what says there can't be a break between the end of the season, regional tournaments, and start of the state tournaments to preserve that revenue on that back end.
Yeah, there's nothing. I mean, it's never been done, and I'm sure, from an athletic perspective, from a coaching perspective, you don't want a 2 or 3 week break necessarily. Yeah. That's not ideal because, you kind of lose your conditioning and flow and so forth. But, this is – how many times we've heard this? This is COVID year,
yeah.
And so you have to make some adjustments. But, the good news is for the kids is they're going to be playing.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to see exactly the format about what's going on. I would not be surprised to see some very strict rules that are going to be that could come down about who can attend at least in January. Mm-hmm. Right now, I think it's at 15% perhaps, but
I don't think that's changed.
It hasn't changed yet.
Right.
And we'll just see how that goes because there's nothing that says that they couldn't say nobody comes or we'll take 2 to 3 parent 3 family members and that's it.
Yeah.
And that way you preserve the kids' right to play, and you put them in an environment that is about as safe as you can be. It's not an administrative nightmare for these schools to try to administer mask and all the stuff that goes along with it. I think you could see that in a lot of areas. And in fact, I think in certain places across the state, they may not let anybody come except for the players.
I'm with you on that front, and I hate to even say this because I've been a parent of children who played sports, and I'd hate to miss their things. But after what I saw in the fall and some of the stress that was placed on ADs and assistant ADs, principals, this kind of thing in terms of dealing with people who came to games, I just didn't think that was fair on them. And the best way to take that pressure off of them and having to deal with those circumstances is to severely limit attendance, at least for the first couple of weeks probably.
Yep.
Just because we're probably going to have a peak after the Christmas break, and that's going to have to be dealt with, and we're not – the vaccines won't be here fully at that point to deal with some of those circumstances. And I just didn't think it was fair in the fall on some of the educators that it was placed on their shoulders to deal with some of these things that should be state issues, not school issues per se. And I don't think it would be fair to do it to them during basketball season. And so I think they should place a pretty strict limitation, at least on the first couple of weeks of attendance. I don't know what that number should be. That it'll have to be based on your gym capacity and that kind of stuff, I would say.
I agree.
So, and then also I think our message all year has been, don't forget, the people who are at the gate are just taking your money and welcoming you to the game. Please be respectful. Please wear your mask while you're there. Do all the things you should be doing. And if you don't want to do those things, don't go.
Yep. Stay
home, listen to it on the radio. If it's broadcast on the radio, watch it online. If it's done that way, do that. Catch up with it. We'll have things on 104thescore.com. We'll keep you in with photos and videos and whatnot.
There you go. Sounds good.
All right, this is Brown Sports Bag brought to you by McDonald's of Glasgow. We'll be right back.
Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's back to the studio with James and John, the Brown Sports Bag.
Well, John, I guess you could say the college football season for our schools, our colleges, would be over, except WKU is playing in a bowl game. They will be playing December 26th against Georgia State. They are 5-6. They have a shot at a 500 record if they win that game. And truth be told, they've actually been playing better of late. I mean, it's quite a turnaround from what we saw at the beginning of the season for the Hilltoppers. I mean, they were finding ways not to win at the beginning of the season, John.
Yeah, I think their schedule earlier in the year was tough. They played good teams.
Yeah.
BYU's obviously good. Liberty's obviously good.
Yeah.
I mean, the schedule, Louisville, though their record didn't really show it, but Louisville wasn't a bad team. They were a really good offensive team.
Yeah.
So, that's 3 of their losses. And the schedule at the back end wasn't near as good as I don't think the Toppers – their losses for the most part were to good teams, but their wins, I can't say they've had a real strong win. To be perfectly honest with you, the teams they've beaten probably weren't great either. So, my philosophy, I'm not a big bowl person. I can't say that, congratulations to them, but I can't say that I'm fired up about it, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think these bowl things are tricky, to be honest with you. It's obviously the exposure. It's an ESPN game on December 26th is good for a lot of schools, and I'm sure it's good for Western. I'm sure they made a cost analysis on this.
Yeah.
Because unlike in the past, I can't imagine you're going to take your team down for a week and do all the things you normally do at a bowl game. You're just not going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So evidently, financially, this move is going to make sense because and this year has been so tough financially on programs. I can't imagine that Western would be making a decision that it's going to cost them money. It's got to be financially make sense. And I give the players credit. A lot of schools are opting out of bowls.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the reasons why schools are opting out of bowls, I think a lot of kids are just fatigued with the football deal. They have not had much of a life since basically August.
Yeah.
And evidently the kids on Western State wants to play. And probably it helps that they have won their last 3 games.
Yeah, they won 3 in a row.
3 in a row, and so they're excited about playing. And and it's not like it's playing on December 26th is only 2 weeks away anyway. Right. So it's not like they got to wait around a lot more time anyway. So Georgia State, where were they, 5-4? And
I think that's right.
Yeah. So congratulations. Am I fired up? No. I mean, I'm not real fired up. But that's just I'm not a big bowl person anyway.
Well, you mentioned their schedule. Their early schedule has proven to be tougher than it looked at first. I mean, when you talk about
Sure.
Liberty, they've lost 1 game this year.
Yep.
Legitimately good offense.
And they were in the top 25 for a while.
Yep. They lost a game to Marshall. I think the thing about the early in the year was the loss to Marshall and loss to UAB were so ugly, not just on the scoreboard, but just for WKU, generally speaking. They just didn't look
because of the offense.
Yeah.
The defense has been strong all year. The offense is not.
Right. So then, and so I think what happened, at least from my perspective, November 7th, when they lost that game to Florida Atlantic, it was kind of like, they've got a chance to lose these next 3 games.
What was that, 10-3 or
10-7? I think 10-6 was the final.
10-6, yeah.
But they were up 6-3 until the last.
But again, offense.
Yeah. So, yes, these last three teams they played proved not to be very good. I mean, Southern Miss, they won that game 10-7. But then they did finally, against Florida International and Charlotte, their offense did manage to produce, or they managed to produce some points and turn things into points.
There's no question they improved.
Yeah.
There's no doubt they've improved.
Yeah, I mean, because they won, 38-21, and then they won 37-10.
And give them credit. I mean, teams can go either way, and they kept fighting through it, and they got all their games in.
Yep.
I give.
Yeah, they played 11 games.
They played
That's
11.
amazing, really.
So that tells me that the kids were disciplined, and even though they weren't having a great year throughout the year, I thought the coaching staff kept them together. Mm-hmm. And they improved as the year goes on, and that is a compliment to the players and coaches.
Yeah.
That's a big time compliment that they managed to kind of stay together and they didn't bail out, even though they did have players who transferred who've already announced they're transferring, but they didn't have any major discipline trouble. And I think that goes again back to the job that Coach Helton has done. I've been very impressed.
You mentioned the kids that are in the transfer portal. I think all of them but one plans to play in the bowl game. That just surprises the heck out of me.
Me too. And in fact, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest with you.
I think a couple of them are grad transfers, but
there's some
3
other
or 4 are not.
Are not. That doesn't make sense. I would think you would want to go ahead and move on. And from a Western perspective, I'm just knowing if I'm coaching, I would. I don't know how to say this. I kind of want to play the players that are going to be coming back to me.
Yeah, it's just I don't think I've ever seen that where somebody's in the transfer portal and they're still gonna stick around and play. I don't. Usually they're done. They're gone at that point.
And as a coach, I'd be done too.
Right.
Yeah, that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I would be. I don't know. I just know how I am. I would not really.
Yeah.
I would just say, okay, for your interest and our interest, you need to go on, and we'll move somebody else up.
Well, I mean, it does beg it is kind of a curious thing where you're like, are they transferring because they've had that conversation and they just don't feel like they have a place at WKU, but they still actually like their teammates and their coaches?
There's a couple starters.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just the weirdest thing. I think the former quarterback, Shanley's the only one who's not planning to play.
Right.
Also, WKU will be able to have their new offensive coordinator at that bowl game as well, Zach Kitley.
Mm-hmm.
I think he actually arrived today from Houston Baptist. He was a graduate assistant at Texas Tech under Cliff Kingsbury there.
Head coach at Arizona Cardinals in the NFL.
Yeah, and that was when Patrick Mahomes was the quarterback at Texas Tech. So he came with high recommendations from those two people apparently. So that's kind of interesting in its own right. Meanwhile, the Louisville Cardinals, they are not they're done.
Ended with a very good win against Wake Forest. Wake Forest had a winning record.
Yeah.
And Louisville blew them out 45-21 with several players out. Mm-hmm. A lot of their key players have not transferred. They just opted out for the pros. They just didn't want to finish the year. Their running back and receiver. And then COVID hit their line, and they started a true freshman at center who was originally 4th string, had never even played center even in high school. And, again, another good coaching job by Satterfield. I mean, that's another team that even through his little issues that he had with flirting with South Carolina, he managed to keep the team together.
Yeah.
And another team that didn't have really any discipline trouble, and a team that got better as the year went on. And give them credit as well. And they've not refused a bowl game. I got the impression, I listened to his talk a little bit on his press conference. I got the impression that they are maybe more interested in just moving on.
Yeah.
Recruiting and so forth. Who knows? I mean, they may accept a bowl. My gut says they won't. Boston College and Pittsburgh, both teams with winning records, they both said they're not playing anymore.
Yeah. I would be surprised if they did the bowl thing as well. They have nothing to gain. Their best option to gain toward next season is to focus on next season now, and just wash their hands of this season. Going back to Satterfield and his flirtation with South Carolina, I did find it interesting the number of players that came out and
supported him. He's very well liked.
Yeah, and especially because he kind of fumbled his response to the flirtation with South Carolina, which, as we mentioned last week, could have been damaging to his ability to recruit and maintain his contact with these players. But
he must have a great relationship with his team.
He really must.
Because if that was they were throwing Bobby Petrino under the bus. The players were, and this is totally different. The players came to his aid and support. Very impressive.
You talk about a contrast. I think there are no players who ever felt like, maybe none, but there are a lot of players who never believed Bobby Petrino had their best interest, and this is the reverse with
especially
Satterfield.
At the last part of it, the second part. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's been the key difference between Satterfield and Petrino in terms of how they are as coaches.
It's probably what stung some of the Louisville fans too. They didn't see this coming out of Satterfield.
Yeah. But apparently the players were they
played hard for him Saturday. They blew out a pretty good Wake Forest team.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Kentucky also they finished the season 4-6.
They're flirting with they voted to go to a bowl.
Ugh.
And the Liberty Bowl is a bowl that they have a shot at.
Yeah.
And it's against another team that I probably wouldn't go across to the courthouse right now and watch them play. It just to me they're not exciting to watch. And of all teams, I would think they would want to move on. They've had death in the program, and they've had all kinds of issues, and they need to restart an offensive approach. I would think they'd be in their best interest to just move on.
Yeah,
they don't really need the exposure per se.
Yeah,
I think Western it makes a little bit more sense because the toppers, a date on ESPN is probably more special than Kentucky, who has the SEC network and who's been on national TV several times anyway.
Yeah. Now I do have a question though. We expect to see a change in offensive philosophy at Kentucky. Do you think a bowl a couple of weeks from now gives them a couple of weeks to maybe work on that and roll that out, and maybe they can see that as a recruiting effort?
They haven't hired anybody.
Well,
and they still got the same people who can't throw.
That's an excellent point. So probably the answer is no, even if they wanted to.
Yeah, and the way Coach Stoops is, he wants to win. If it's running at 98% of the time, that's what he's going to do.
Yeah. Real quick, though, speaking of the SEC and the exposure, the SEC played an only SEC schedule this year.
Yeah.
And I think what we learned is there's only Alabama in the SEC. We talk all the time about all the hard knocks in that conference, but Alabama.
Well, they rolled this year, no question. They were the by far the best team and probably the best team in the country. They would probably roll any conference in the country, to be honest with you. But I think Georgia's good, especially after they switched. They found their quarterback finally. He got the transfer from USC. I think he's really good. And I think Florida's good, but man, that's a terrible loss to LSU. Just a horrible loss. And they basically lack of discipline. It cost them that game when the kid had LSU stopped and tackled him and threw the guy's shoe 20 yards, which gave him an automatic first down. And no, I'm serious. I think it's lack of discipline. And I really am a big fan of the coach there, Mullen. But he has shown some signs here this year in particular that I've kind of taken a little bit, changed my opinion a little bit, where I think he's been out of control a little bit on some of his actions and some of the things. And that was a situation where it looked like to me a team got caught because of lack of discipline.
Real quick on the Dan Mullen thing, I think he's a good coach in a lot of ways, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But I will hearken back to Dak Prescott's last year at Mississippi State, and they played Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl. And I think they ran on 3rd down and 4th down on 4 or 5 different occasions the exact same play and got stopped every time. And they were playing their state rivals. And I always think back to that and wonder to myself, there should have been something else they could have figured out during that particular window instead of running that same play over and over and over and not being able to execute it. So I've always kind of wondered about Dan Mullen sometimes in that particular aspect. But I didn't really wonder about his discipline, but yes, you're right. This year at Florida,
he's been a little out of control at times.
Yeah, he seems to have let some things get to him, and maybe that happens when you're the coach at Florida, unless you're Steve Spurrier, and you can just blow it off and people laugh.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everybody else seems to get caught up in that Florida grind, I guess is what it is, and get chewed up by it, to be honest with you. All right, this is Brown Sports Bag, brought to you by McDonald's of Glasgow. We'll be right back.
Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's back to the studio with James and John, the Brown Sports Bag.
Well, John, the college basketball season, this kind of is in line with what we were discussing earlier with what we might expect to see from the high school basketball season once the schedule starts. The college basketball season, you just don't know which games are actually being played each night when you get right down to it.
No, you don't. The difference between high school and college, though, is they test these college players 4 days a week at least.
Yeah.
Sometimes more than that, and high school kids aren't tested.
Yeah.
So, actually, in a weird way, the colleges could be more interrupted because you don't even know in high school.
Yeah. There's no comfort in that other than the fact that you might play the games you expect to see played on the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, the WK Hilltoppers bounced back. They won 2 games, beat Gardner-Webb and Rhode Island. I don't know if the wins were impressive, though. I mean, I know Gardner-Webb and Rhode Island are usually decent mid-major programs. Gardner-Webb can usually shoot the lights out. Rhode Island usually has good talent.
Mm-hmm.
They were both close wins. But I'm still not sure. Based on how good we think WKU should be, I don't know if they were impressive wins, John.
Yeah, I guess we'll know at the end of the year when we see what Gardner-Webb looks like in Rhode Island. I think Rhode Island is pretty good, but the first half yesterday against Rhode Island was not well played at all.
Yeah,
there was just way too many turnovers and so forth, and it didn't look good. But the good news is they pulled out both wins late in both games, so that's good. And Charles Bassey is playing like an All-American.
Yeah,
I mean, he's tremendous out there, and
all the people who have him at the top in the top 5 on the NBA draft board don't look like they're missing the mark right now, at least in terms of how he's playing defense in college.
Yeah, I mean, he's playing great, and has expanded his game where he can make threes, and he really moves well too. And I think he'll be able to guard pick and rolls that they're asked the centers to defend. The difference is that the game has evolved where the traditional center or the 5 is not as important as it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But they still need shot blocking, and he can do all that stuff. So he's for real. Tavion Hollingsworth continues to play well.
Mm-hmm. The
problem with Western is outside of Bassey and Hollingsworth, it's kind of been the other players have been inconsistent.
Yeah.
I think they're better at the point guard. The point guard position, both Cooper and McKnight played well up in the Dakotas, but have not played quite as well since then. They've been inconsistent in terms of their play.
Yeah.
Carson Williams did not score against Gardner-Webb, and he only had 2 points the next game. That's a little. I think the problem with Carson Williams and Bassey, they're both good players, but I don't know if they play as well together.
Yeah.
Carson Williams really played well last year after Bassey got hurt. They moved him to the 5, and I don't know if they complement each other very well.
Yeah, Carson Williams is built like Justin Johnson, but he does not have the shooting range of Justin Johnson.
Right.
If you had Bassey and Justin Johnson playing together, that would be a great pair.
Yeah.
But Carson Williams is basically an undersized center.
Yeah, and he can make a 3, but it's still not his game. It just seems like to me that and Josh Anderson has been inconsistent. He's a senior, and he had a really good game yesterday. Had 15 points.
Yeah.
But, again, he's not somebody that really spreads the floor a lot. He's a driver and great athlete, one of the best athletes ever played there. So they've had a little inconsistent play, but at least they've come back off that terrible loss to Louisville where they won 3 straight.
Mm-hmm.
And at least they're getting games in, so they're improving that way.
Yeah.
I still think they're really good, but they've not kind of had that wow moment since the South Dakota trip.
Yeah, and you mentioned the wins. The other thing that has happened that is kind of interesting is that I think the Gardner-Webb game and the Rhode Island game were not originally on their schedule. These are ones they had to add because others got canceled. And so they've worked hard to get in the games. You mentioned getting in the games.
Yeah, Gardner-Webb, that was Gardner-Webb's first game.
Yeah, so the interesting start to the season in terms of the schedules and that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, also interesting with the schedules, Louisville, they were supposed to play Wisconsin last week. That got postponed. They've picked them up for this Saturday. So that game now.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
Yeah,
okay.
I think they finalized it this morning.
Well, they lost the North Carolina State game, too.
Yeah, which was supposed to be played, I think, tomorrow or this Wednesday. So that game has been postponed. That's an actual conference game that they were missing.
Well, I know the women's, Louisville women also, number 2 in the country, they've had a case of COVID, and they've canceled games, too.
Yeah, and so – that's kind of by the time Louisville gets to play again, I think they will be off almost 3 weeks if they manage to play that game against Wisconsin.
And then they have Kentucky coming up, too.
Yeah, the 2 weeks after that? Week after that, I guess. Yep. The 26th, I think, is when they're supposed to play Kentucky.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Kentucky did get in a game, looked terrible in the first half.
Against Notre Dame.
I think they were down 22 at halftime.
22.
Yeah, but they came back, made it a 64-63 final.
They gave up 48 points the first half.
Yeah.
And only gave up 16 the second half.
Right.
Listen, is Notre Dame good? They're probably slightly above average. Slightly above average, and not much more than that. Notre Dame is good at what they do. They are a finesse team that can really shoot it, and they went on an 18-0 run against Kentucky in the first half. Kentucky looked atrocious in the first half. They looked as bad as they did against Memphis.
Yeah.
And they made a great run in the second half. Got it all the way back. I think it was tied. May have taken a 1-point lead, and but missed a shot at the buzzer. Olivier Sarr, who played well. I think he had 18 points or 20 points. Missed a shot at the buzzer. And so Kentucky falls to 1-4 again. They did not shoot it well at all. Did not have very many assists. They did move Terrence Clark to the point, and I think that's a permanent move, 6'7" point guard. And I think it's not. I think it's more because of the other point guards aren't playing as well, or maybe don't have that skill set. To be honest with you, they got a long way to go. They could be a really good defensive team. And I'm sure Cal's going to get something figured out. But they don't have the shooters, what I've seen, and they're staring at 1-4, and then it's going to start eventually. If they don't get this turned around, they better start. They're going to start winning some games to get themselves eligible down the road. Now is the SEC great? No. I think Tennessee's probably the best. Tennessee's the only team ranked in the top 25. So there are games along the way that as he gets his team improving, then I'm sure Kentucky will be a force in the SEC. The problem though with Kentucky though is they've not had a COVID outbreak.
Yeah.
And when you're a young team, he starts all freshmen except for Sarr, who's a transfer. They need practice time. Mm-hmm. They need as much time together as they can. That could be a problem if they have to quarantine for a couple weeks in terms of their improvement.
Yeah, they are 1-4 right now. Their only win, I think, is by 2 points against Seton Hall. And here's a little fact for you: Rhode Island, one of Rhode Island's.
No, Louisville beat Seton Hall.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Louisville beat Seton Hall.
Kentucky beat. I don't know. Was it Moorhead or Eastern? It was somebody early in here. Yeah,
I'm sorry. I had mixed that up because what I was going to say is that Rhode Island also beat Seton Hall by 12.
Yeah.
But I was looking at the wrong schedule when I was making that note. Scratch that. As we get ready for, I guess, the continuation of the basketball season, one of the interesting things that happened was Duke said they just canceled everything. They're not playing until conference starts.
Yeah.
I just thought that was an interesting response to everything.
Coach K took a lot of criticism after that because he basically, after they lost to Michigan State to drop to 2-2, and they were manhandled, I believe, by Michigan State. Maybe it wasn't Michigan. They've lost to Michigan State, but maybe it was Illinois. It was Illinois, I believe. They lost to Illinois. Yeah, I believe I'm right. I'm trying to keep up the Duke losses. It's not easy anymore.
Well, just keeping up with who played when they were supposed to.
Yeah, I think maybe now it's Illinois, but he just said we shouldn't be playing now. It's too much of stress on the kids, and they're not going to get a chance to go home for Christmas and all that stuff. And all that I'm sure is true, but it came across as a little bit of sour grapes, So I don't know. I mean, he can afford some losses, and I'm sure it is stressful for him. And he's up in age and so forth. And I don't like Duke's team at all. I like Kentucky's team a lot better than I like Duke's team. Duke has gone down that path with Kentucky where they got brand new players every year.
Yeah,
it's hard to win unless you got the best of the best of the best new players, and I just don't see it with them.
Well, and I think I do have a curiosity about how this all affects recruiting going forward in so many ways, because when I see Calipari and I see Coach K complaining about some of the things that they are apparently having issues with, I'm like, well,
they created it.
Well, especially I don't know. I think it was K that was complaining about the fact that this is better for veteran teams, and I'm like, okay,
yeah,
just recruit people who will stick around,
get grad transfers, and things like that. And I just don't understand from Kentucky's perspective. He needs to try to get 3 of the top 50 players in the country that is not going to come around, and recruit shooters. Most shooters stick around.
Yeah,
they're not the NBA people. You see the shooters that are much more prevalent on some of the non-Power 5 teams. There are people across the country who'd love to come, but you got to play them.
Right.
He didn't play them. That's the problem. He drives them off,
yeah.
And I think he's missed an opportunity to have some of the NBA players. You don't need 8 of them, but you need couple, 2 or 3, and you mix them with veterans, your sophomores, juniors, and seniors who are maybe not quite as dynamic, but they've got a skill set. Mm-hmm. I think you could really formulate a good team that way. But the problem with Cal is that he just will not hardly play you if all you can do is shoot. He has no patience for the defensive lapses and so forth. And I think there's a way to combine the two that I don't know if he's really figured it out.
The situation for Coach K and Calipari to me reminds me of a scene from Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. The guy sits down at the buffet and eats and eats and eats because he has gluttony, and he eventually explodes when he eats a dinner mint. Okay,
too many good players.
Well, yes, it's gluttony. You have so many good things that you can't really figure out how to make it work together.
They didn't have enough good shooters.
Well, I mean, when you got so many good 5 stars,
talents,
so to speak, that you don't ask the question, do they fit together? And it's kind of like Daryl Morey in the NBA whenever you're putting together a team.
Good point.
Do these people fit together as a team? Will they get you to the finals? And if the answer is no, I don't care how talented they are, you're still not meeting the end objective, which is to win the national championship, win the NBA finals. You're still not getting there, no matter who's on your team.
Yeah, and if you have veterans coming back, even if they're not quite as talented, but maybe they have that skill set, then the sophomores and juniors, you're not starting over every year.
Yeah. I still point out,
which would drive me crazy.
Right. I still point out that Darius Miller was on that national championship team, He was critical to that team.
He certainly was.
There was a lot of talent, but Darius Miller was critical to that team.
Yes, he was.
All right, it's Brown Sports Bag brought to you by McDonald's of Glasgow. We'll be right back.
Presented by McDonald's of Glasgow, it's back to the studio with James and John, the Brown Sports Bag.
Well, John, rather fascinating turn of events in the high school football playoffs last week. Bowling Green knocked off Covington Catholic, and
First time they've done that. They were 0-3 against them, I believe.
Yeah, and I tell you what, here was the thing. I did the game night, U.S. Army game night show on the 102.7 over in Bowling Green with Brian Webb and Casey Warner on Friday night. Mm-hmm. And walking into the studio, we do these picks, and I was going to pick Covington Catholic to win the game, and I was just looking through some stuff. And I was like, you know what? I think Bowling Green's going to win this game.
There you go.
Because their offense has been playing well, and their defense has been playing well, and they were spot on the defensive side, especially against Covington Catholic.
Yeah, they got an interception return for a touchdown, didn't they?
Yep.
And I think they had at least three interceptions.
Yeah, and then Javi Bunton, their running back, I mean, he's become a beast. You know, when I saw that they beat South Warren and they put up the 41 points on them, that was when I was like, okay, their offense is clicking now. It was not necessarily clicking against good teams through the season, but it started in the playoffs.
Yeah, congratulations. They're in the state finals against you talking about some old school rivalry, them and Owensboro.
Yeah.
In the finals, and I think Bowling Green's going to win.
I do too.
I really do. I think their schedule has been much better than Owensboro.
Mm-hmm.
Playing Trinity and St. X and all those teams at South Warren, Covcath. I think they're prepared for it, and I would make them the favorite over Owensboro.
Yeah, and the irony of them two playing in the state finals is that most years, traditionally, the way the brackets were set up, they would have played each other in the regional finals or maybe even the semifinals, depending on how those districts set up, because they're both technically in the western side of the state.
Right.
But since they're doing that RPI reseeding thing, that's what winds up allowing them to play in the state finals instead of them playing each other last week.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes for a nifty state finals because they do have a lot of history with each other. They've played a lot through the years in a lot of critical playoff games. I think years ago they may have even been in the same district with each other back when they were 3As together.
Oh, we were. Barron, Owensboro, and Bowling Green were in the same district.
Yeah, I mean, so they have a lot of history with each other, and they're two of the older football programs in the state playing the state finals, which makes it interesting.
That is correct.
And then a couple of other interesting outcomes in the state finals, or getting to the state finals. The team that Allen County lost to, Franklin County, they have Broyles as their quarterback. Nick Broyles, I think is his name, has not thrown an interception this year. They were playing Johnson Central. I really thought Johnson Central, which is a 4A powerhouse, would beat them. Broyles was on fire. I think he threw a 73-yard touchdown. That Franklin County team, which is not – Franklin County's not known for their football. Frankfort is.
Right.
But Franklin County usually not. I mean, he's good. They're good. That's going to be an interesting state final. They do get Boyle County, which is nobody's favorite to play.
Yeah, they are known for their football.
Yeah.
And you got Male and Trinity.
Yep.
And Trinity, it's kind of boring to talk about them. I mean, they may have the best defense in state history, according to what I've seen and read. So, Male's probably the second best team overall in the state.
When they played during the regular season, Trinity won that game by 29. So that's how good Trinity is versus everybody else so far this year.
That's correct.
Real quick, the NFL, can you believe only has 3 weeks left?
They've done a great job of managing their way. No cancellations. They've moved games around.
Yeah, they've had some oddball kind of postponements and schedules.
But they have managed this COVID incredible.
Yeah.
And give them credit. It's a tremendously well-run league, and those guys kind of know what they're doing, to be honest with you. And it is, I mean, this is the last tonight. You got, I think, Cleveland and Baltimore.
Yeah, huge game for both of them.
Huge game, but it looks like we're going down the stretch. Kansas City now is in first in overall in the AFC, and it looks like to me Green Bay is probably the best team right now in the NFC.
Yeah, the injury to Drew Brees has definitely derailed the Saints offensively. Their defense had played real well, but yesterday Sanders and Jalen Hurts really carved them up on the ground, which is I think they'd gone 53 games without giving up a 100-yard rusher.
Yeah, they were due a loss.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, it's their first loss without Drew. They had actually gone the last 2 years 7-0 without Drew Brees.
Yeah.
So it was their first loss, but they have not looked the same. They've been very conservative offensively. They'll need Drew Brees if they're going to beat the big boys in the playoffs.
Yeah, so, I mean, but I'm with you. The Packers, especially with Aaron Rodgers, their offense is electrifying at the moment. It
is, and he's playing at an MVP level. And the question with Green Bay is their defense good enough? They got bullied last year by the 49ers.
Mm-hmm.
Just bullied them, punched them in the mouth. They couldn't stop them. I don't think there's a defense that's quite that way this year.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest with you. So I think Green Bay is, in my opinion, they're the favorite to come out of the NFC.
I will tell you, the Rams impressed me last week because of their change in their offense.
They got a good
using
defense.
The 2 tight ends and the running the ball a lot more.
They got a great defense.
And they do have a good defense. On the AFC side, I think it's Kansas City.
It is. Buffalo looked awful good last night.
They really did. Josh Allen's come along. Their receivers have gotten good. Their defense is good. So I think to close the NFL season, pretty interesting, John.
Yes.
This is Brown Sports Bag brought to you by McDonald's Glasgow. We'll be back next week.
Thanks for listening, and be sure and join James and John once again next Monday at 4 for the Brown Sports Bag, a local weekly sports machine presented by McDonald's of Glasgow.
Coming soon to your FM dial, this is Fox Sports Radio, WCDS Glasgow, AM 1230.